Okay, here we go again with another video. Today we are going to be talking about applying your research and writing a draft. And hopefully only the people that are not scheduled to come to class on Thursday will be watching this, because we will be back in the classroom on Thursday. This week we will be back in the classroom. It has been cleaned and disinfected, and I've actually found that out on Monday, but I'd already said being online on Tuesday, so here we go. We'll be back on Thursday. And so this is what I'll be covering in class on Thursday. And for all of you Tuesday people, this is for you. All right, so some announcements. Remember, you should be finishing up your peer review right now. If you're watching this on Thursday, then you should have finished it, at least if not by now. You have to finish it by tonight, because the final draft is due tomorrow, due Friday by 11:59. However, I will give you 3 extra points if you turn it in by noon. I don't know, just trying to be generous here. And it's only 12 hours. So, and that gives you your Friday night free to do whatever you want to do. So if you turn it in by noon on Friday, tomorrow, then I will give you 3 extra points on that grade. Remember that you're going to review the researched argument assignment sheet. I'm going to go over that in class, and I'll post it on D2L as well. So just make sure that you look over that, because that's the next assignment we're going to be working on. We've been building up towards this researched argument, and now we're finally getting to it. Make sure you complete your weekly quiz by Sunday. And also, I sent out an email I posted this on D2L. I didn't send out an email. And I'm guessing that no one has read D2L, because at this point, at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, I have not received one single text or email about scheduling an individual conference. But next week, we are not actually meeting in class. I am going to meet individually with each one of you to talk about how you're doing so far in the class, and to see how your research is going and how you feel about the research project, and if you have any questions or anything like that. So they're only 15-minute meetings. They're super quick, and that's going to count for your attendance next week, as if you come to the meeting, but it's also a part of your writing process grade. So make sure that you sign up for a time. There is on D2L, on that news post, I put a sign-up sheet so you can see what times are available. And I'll update that some as people, sign up for times. I'll have it in class with me on Thursday. So make sure that you email or text and pick a time. I will give each individual time to the person who contacts me first. So if you have a particular time you want to come, make sure that you let me know early. So that will be on Tuesday and Thursday of next week. You will have just a 15-minute meeting with me in my office, or we can do WebEx as well. If you would prefer to do that. You will have to turn on your camera for it. I know sometimes people don't like to do that, but I'm not going to meet individually with a blank screen. So if you want to do it by WebEx, I'll just make a general meeting, and you can just sign into the meeting whenever it is whatever time you signed up for. And if you don't make your time, or if you're late, then you will probably just have to reschedule. But like I said, remember, it's part of your grade to do this. So make sure that you do contact me and sign up for a time. They're running from 9 o'clock in the morning through 2:30. I think it's the last time I've got that I'm scheduling on next Tuesday and next Thursday. So you just have to sign up. They're on 15-minute increments. So just pick a time and let me know. All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to transfer the research you've done into your researched argument. Now you're actually answering your question. You're actually going to be able to get down to what you've been trying to do this whole time, which is answer that question, the research question that you came up with at the beginning. Learn how to make changes and adjustments to your thesis as you begin your final paper, because your thesis may not be the same as it was at the beginning. You chose a research question and thesis probably towards the beginning, and you knew where you were going to stand, but it might have changed by now after you've done some reading and some research. Learn how to choose which of the research you have you have will best back up your thesis. You aren't going to be able to use everything. So how to choose the best stuff that you can use and how to connect your sources to each other. Learn how to organize and write your draft, and then how to create your counter argument. So that's something that you have to include in your paper. You're not only presenting your argument and supporting it, but you're also going to present the counter argument. In other words, the argument against what you're trying to say. And then you're going to refute it. In other words, you're going to say, some people believe this, however, and then you're going to point out how your argument is going to be better than theirs. So this is from the paper. Before starting your researched argument assignment, ask yourself, so these are the things that you need to do to prepare yourself before you actually start writing. How has your thinking changed based on your research? So have you learned something new that's changed your point of view that you want to end up changing possibly in your thesis? Was my working thesis on target? Do I need to rework my thesis based on what I've learned? You may be making changes to that. And that's why it's called a working thesis. In other words, you're still working on it. So if you've read something that's maybe changed your point of view, changed your argument, that's fine. The only thing you can't change is your topic. But you can adjust your research question somewhat, and you can change your thesis and your argument, because that's what happens when you do research and you learn more, is you may change your point of view. How does the information in my sources mesh with my research questions and help me answer those questions? So think about which sources are going to be the most helpful to answer your question. Have any additional important questions or subtopics come up that I will need to address in my paper? So we talked about this toward the beginning of the semester, that you're going to have your main thesis, which is your main question you're going to answer, but then you have sub-questions or little subtopics that relate back to that argument that help support that argument. Are there new things that you hadn't thought about before you started doing this research? You may have come up with new issues or discovered new things related to your topic as you're doing research that now you're like, oh, I need to make sure I put that in my paper too. How do my sources complement each other? What ideas or facts recur in multiple sources? So think about how your sources work together. That was the point of this literature review assignment, is you're thinking about how they speak to each other and how they work together. So, if the sources are saying the same thing over and over again, then and kind of quoting from each other, how are you going to use that to support your argument? Where do my sources disagree with each other, and why? So all of your, sorry, I kicked my table. Not all of the sources are going to agree with each other fully, and that's, again, what you've looked at in your literature review. So thinking about why they disagree and on what points they disagree can kind of help you support your argument and kind of present different bits of information in different ways. So you're going to want to select those useful details from your sources as you're working. So now's the time to think about how you will use the research you've gathered. You probably found a whole bunch of good stuff. Hopefully you did. You want to have too much rather than not enough, because you don't want to get to the end and you're at 4 pages or something and you're like, oh crap, I got to put in a bunch more stuff. So hopefully you found a lot of good stuff, but you're probably not going to be able to use all of it. Not all of it's going to fit necessarily into the argument you're trying to make, and some of it's going to be redundant. It's going to repeat itself, and you don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again and just using different sources to say it. So now's the time to filter through it and find what is most relevant and appropriate for the argument you're making in your research paper. So you use your critical thinking skills to filter out what will best explain and develop your ideas. And remember, this is explaining and developing your ideas. You are the one that is creating this argument. You're the one that's going to be arguing it. The sources aren't arguing it. They're just supporting your points, but you're the one that has to make those points. So you're developing your own ideas. So think about which sources are going to support your ideas the best. Make sure all the subtopics you cover for support in your paper are closely related to your main argument. You don't want to go off topic. We talked about this before. You want to stay as focused as you can on the particular subject that you're trying to write about and the argument you're trying to make. And sometimes, it's easy to kind of go off on tangents. I know I do it all the time, but when you're focused in your academic writing, you need to stay focused on your argument, and all the subtopics and the sub-questions that you're going to be talking about should relate directly back to that thesis. So begin with the supporting details that clearly back up your thesis. So is this detail from a reliable, these are questions you think about. Is it from a reliable, high-quality source? So we already talked about the CRAP test and how to figure out whether a source is reliable or not. So make sure, even though once you get to your actual research paper, you don't have to use every source from all the sources don't have to be from the library, but they still should be reliable, high quality sources. They should be trustworthy. So is it appropriate for you to cite that in an academic paper? The bulk of the support of your thesis should come from reliable, reputable sources. If most of the details that support your thesis are from less reliable sources, you probably need to do some more research, because if I see a lot of sources that don't really seem like they're going to be reliable and they're not academic, then those, I'm going to take points off for that. You need to make sure that you're finding academic, reliable sources. Is the link between this information and my thesis obvious, or will I need to explain it to my readers? So, you're going to want to, every time you put a piece of information into your paper, you're going to, first of all, make sure you put that in-text or parenthetical citation after it, of course. But for every quote, paraphrase, summary you put in there, you need to tell us after it, why is it important? Why did you choose it? How does it support your argument? You should be explaining each one of your quotes and paraphrases, any of your outside information. Not only are you citing it, but you're also going to explain the connection between it and your argument. So you spend a lot more time thinking and reading about this topic than your audience. You're going to know more about this topic than a lot of people in the class, probably because you are the one that's been doing all this research. So it may seem obvious to you, like, duh, this is the connection between this quote and how it supports my argument. But in your mind, it makes sense, but someone who hasn't been reading about the topic, they may not make that same connection. So this is how you fill out your paper. This is how you make those 7 pages, is you explaining what are the connections, how is it important, how does it support your argument. So make sure that you have, as you go through, jot down ideas for making those connections. What personal biases or experiences may affect the way I interpret this information? So a lot of these topics you're talking about are emotional topics. They're things that are personal to you. And so you probably do have some sort of personal bias or personal experience with the particular subject. And that's okay to have that. But when you're writing in academic situations, you need to make sure that you are not letting those biases creep in. You're presenting the most rational, unbiased argument that you can. So you have your personal opinions and experiences, and you just have to fight against turning what you're saying into more of like a Facebook post, argumentative, emotional post. That's not what you're writing. You're writing academic research paper. So you have to make sure you stay focused on that academic tone and that you don't let those biases and that personal experience and things like that creep into it to where it's more of an emotional type paper as opposed to academic. So using support that goes against your thesis. So I talked about this a little while ago. You will be presenting a counter-argument in your thesis, a counter-argument to your thesis in your paper. And then you're going to explain why your argument is actually better. So if there are sources, and you should find sources that argue against your thesis, that are going to go against your argument, you don't throw those away because you're going to use them in your counter-argument. So you're going to say, some people believe blah, blah, blah about this topic. And then you can use it, for example, in the article, blah, 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 the writer states, blah, blah, blah. And then, however, your argument's better because, you're not going to say your, of course, but you know what I mean. You're going to explain that other side of the argument, but then explain why your side is the one that's the more reputable, the one that people should follow. As your working thesis changes, the source might be more important than you think, because as you start to, if you adjust your thesis somewhat, you might end up using that. It may support more of the argument. You may think it's really far off your argument, but it may be closer than you think it is. So consider how all your research fits into the big picture of your paper. Excuse me. So think about how all the different things in your research that you've done, your research fit into, like, where it's going to go into your paper. So finding connections between sources. Do most sources seem to agree on a particular idea? Are there some facts mentioned repeatedly in many different sources? So what key terms, major concepts come up the most? Does one author refer to another author's book or article? So how do sources that are more recent build upon ideas developed in earlier sources? So thinking about these things is how you're going to identify important ideas to discuss in your paper. If there's a lot of different sources talking about the same thing and agreeing on the same thing or disagreeing about the same thing, that's something that you should really be pointing out and you should really be examining. So be aware of any redundancies in your sources. Don't keep saying the same thing from different sources. That's not going to build your argument. You're just repeating yourself. So if the source doesn't add anything new, if it's not telling us something different than the other sources, then maybe you need to find a different source. If you find the strongest sources that each have different arguments and different information or said in different ways, then that's what's going to be the best to support your argument. If you find significant disagreements among reliable sources, you will need to review them and evaluate each source. So which source presents the sounder argument or more solid evidence? It's up to you to determine that. So you figure out which one is the most credible, even if there are disagreements there. So reevaluating your working thesis. A careful analysis of your notes will help you reevaluate that working thesis and determine if you're going to need to revise it. You probably will. You may have the same thesis throughout, but a lot of times you're going to end up at least revising it a little bit. Even if your sources generally confirm your preliminary thinking on the topic, it's still a good idea to tweak the wording of your thesis to incorporate specific details you learned from research. In other words, we're going to talk about how you're writing in the claim because reasons. In other words, the answer to your question because, and then the reasons you're going to cover in your paper. Now that you've done the research, you probably know those specific reasons that you're going to use for your paper. And so that is what that's the things that you're going to be adding to your thesis now, is you've got more specific information so you can add those specifics to your thesis. So synthesizing that source material, you got to put it all together. So analyze how your notes relate to your major research question and sub-questions you identified at the start of your research process. So your main question and all the little sub-questions that feed into it that help answer that question. Organize your notes with headings. I like to do different colors, highlight things in different colors, and it helps me organize it. You can put things in different piles or on different pages or in different folders, that kind of thing, and decide that what was I saying? You might identify some important subtopics that were not part of your original plan, or you might decide that some questions you're not even going to use anymore. Begin jotting down big ideas you will use to connect the dots for your reader. Try answering your major research question and the sub-questions so you can, before you even start writing, write out your major questions and then give the general short answers to it. And then that's where you're going to start building on each one of those answers is how you build out your paper. It's almost like creating an outline. So planning how to organize your paper. So we've talked about organizational structures. You're probably going to be using either chronological or order of importance because remember, you're persuading. So those are the two that usually go along best with when you're writing to persuade. Some paragraphs in your paper will consist mostly of details from your research, but remember you must explain what those details mean or how they are linked or how they're important and how they support your argument. Also include sentences and transitions that show the relationship between different claims and evidence from your research by grouping related ideas or pointing out connections or contrast. You are not simply presenting information. You are not just telling me what the sources say. You are analyzing it, you're synthesizing it, you're interpreting it, you're explaining to me how that information answers your research question and how it supports your argument. Then you get to writing your draft. Now, we're not going to go into big, deep depth of this today, but just overall, we've talked a lot about this before. Research papers generally follow the same basic structure. You've got your intro that presents the thesis. You got the body section that answers that question, that gives it more detail and supports the argument that's in the thesis, gives that evidence, and the conclusion that revisits the thesis in other different words and provides additional insights or suggestions for further research. And we'll go into more of that now. Last week, we talked about writing your intros and conclusions, so definitely refer to the previous video and slides. But your writing voice is going to come across most strongly in your intro and conclusion. That's where we're really going to get a feel of how you feel about the particular topic you're talking about and your argument. That's also where you attract your reader's interest and you present your argument. So that's where your voice is going to be the strongest in the intro and conclusion. You're usually not going to put sources in there. You're not going to cite things. You're not going to quote and paraphrase and put all that kind of stuff in your intro and conclusion. This is more of you setting up your argument and concluding your argument. They focus on the intro conclusion, focus on the big picture, not specific details. That is for the body of your paper. And remember that funnel and reverse funnel method that we talked about in the video last week. So, using primary and secondary research. Now remember, primary sources present first-hand information while secondary sources are one step removed, so they talk about primary sources. They're going to be analysis or interpretations of those primary sources. So when you're using secondary sources, and that's mostly what you're actually probably going to be using, make sure they're as closely linked to the primary research as possible. So like journal articles, case studies, different things that are more reliable. The further you get away from the primary source material, then the less reliable those sources are. So make sure it's as closely linked to your topic as it possibly can be. So using those sources, a lot of times people get confused about what the different types of things that you're going to do. So the first thing is a summary. So what a summary is when you take a large piece of information and you make it small. In other words, you give me just the main ideas. So you would summarize an entire article or an entire book or an entire chapter, and you give it to me in a couple of sentences, and you tell me what the main ideas and the main arguments are. Versus a paraphrase is restating information in your own words, which sounds similar to a summary, but paraphrase is where you're taking a small piece of information and you're making it about the same length. So say, for example, you're going to paraphrase 3 sentences. Then when you write that in your own words, it's still going to be about 3 sentences. So you're restating the information in your own words. And it's usually, like I said, about the same size. You're not condensing information and making it smaller. You are just restating it about the same length in different words. Now, don't just go in and use synonyms for stuff. Don't just hit the thesaurus and think, I'll just change like 3 words in here and it'll make it different. You have to do it in your own words, your own sentence structure. You have to do it in a way that where it's not, if you're just replacing a few words in there, then that's considered plagiarism. Quote is, of course, when you are quoting directly, you're quoting word for word from your source. So you actually put it in the quotation marks and you are using the exact wording that the writers use. So incorporating source material into your body paragraphs. Now remember, like I said, you are making the claims, not the sources. You're the one that's presenting the argument, not the sources. You're only using the sources to support the argument you are trying to make. So as you draft your body paragraphs, you must express your critical thinking about the ideas and information that you incorporate from your sources. You must offer claims of your own that either challenge or extend points from your sources. So you present claims, you use your the sources to support that claim. You're not supporting the claim from the source is supporting your claim. You will need to integrate ideas carefully in the paragraph level and at the sentence level. We'll talk more about that as we go along. You're going to use those topic sentences and concluding sentences in the body paragraphs to introduce the reader and to sum up for the reader what you're saying, the significance of the information you're putting in your body paragraphs. For each one, you're going to have that topic sentence and concluding sentence. You will constantly be explaining how the source material relates to your thesis. You are going to interpret that information and you're going to present the source material, but then you're going to link it back to, again, telling me why it's important. Link it back to the argument. How does it support your argument? Why did you even use this information? What does this information do to add to your argument? You will also include sentences that transition between ideas from your research, either within a paragraph or from one paragraph to the next. So introducing the cited material, make sure, we talked about this before, that you are going to introduce your information. You're not just going to plop it in there, just have, starts and ends with a quote. That's not going to be okay. You need to think carefully about how you introduce your summarized, paraphrased, and quoted material. So you're going to use those signal phrases, the introductory phrases in your text, to help you integrate that source material smoothly. Citation technique also helps convey that you are actively engaged with your source material. In other words, that you are working with it, that you are interpreting it, that you're analyzing it. And you're going to use, you don't want to necessarily say in every one of your introductory phrases, the writer says, or the author writes. So this is just, I made this little, I think this was in the book, where you could say the author argues. That's hard to say without saying author argues. Ask, asserts, believes. So these are some different words you can use instead of writes or says. You can use these different words to kind of mix it up a little bit, make it fun as it can be. So quoting sources, again, you want to actually do this fairly sparingly. I don't want to see big blocks of quotes throughout your paper because it doesn't take any work to quote from a source. That doesn't really show that you're engaging with the material. It just seems like you are just using it to write your paper. You want to rely more on paraphrases and summaries, but as you are quoting, make sure you have transcribed the original statement accurately. Make sure you're saying exactly what they're saying in that particular piece of writing. You want to represent the author's ideas honestly. I could say that a movie review, if I were to say, I thought it was the worst movie I've ever seen, but my mom loved it. My mom would have loved it. And if you just quote out and say, my mom loved it, that's not what I was trying to say. That's not the point of what I was trying to say. You're just quoting the piece that helps you. But if the piece that helps you is not what they're actually trying to say in that piece, then you can't use that. Make sure you quote enough of the original text to reflect the author's point accurately. Again, don't just use a dropped-in quotation. You've got to integrate that quoted material into your own sentence using that introductory signaling phrase. If you are changing anything or taking anything out, you use the ellipses if you need to omit a word or phrase, and use brackets if you need to replace a word. That is if it maybe doesn't fit into your sentence grammatically the way you want it to, and I've got an example of that in just a minute. Make sure that any omissions or changed words do not alter the meaning of the text. So you're only omitting and replacing when you absolutely have to. Maybe if it's just to shorten it so you don't have a huge block of text, or like I said, to make it fit grammatically into your sentence. Remember to include correctly formatted citations that follow the assigned style guide, MLA, for every quote and paraphrase. You have to have a citation after every single quote, paraphrase, or summary. So here's some examples of what I was talking about. Don't just drop in a quote, that introductory signaling phrase. So let's say, and I just made these quotes up, like none of this actually exists. For some reason, I was thinking about elephants the other day when I did this. So don't just have a sentence where it says, the research shows that 35% of all elephants wish they had longer trunks. I don't know. But you see how the sentence just starts and ends pretty much with a quote. You need to have a signaling phrase. So even it could be something as simple as this. According to the article, and then you give the quote. But again, of course, you have your citations there. Now, using the ellipses when you need to exclude words or shorten a quote. So the original quote, say, for example, again, I made all these up. According to observation, elephants in the wild often dance around when a new calf is born. The males are the ones who won't dance. However, the whole family joins in singing when there are twins. None of that makes sense, but say I didn't want to actually use all that information because I was focusing on maybe the birth of it, I guess. According to observation, elephants in the wild often dance around when a new calf is born. And then we got ellipses because we took out the part about the ones who don't dance. And then continue on, however, the whole family joins in, da-da-da. And then we've got the citation afterwards. Now, brackets when you need to replace words to make it fit better. So let's say the original quote says, I found that that mother elephants often seek out sources of alcohol when their babies annoy them. Again, I made that up. But say, for example, you when you want to shorten that quote, the saying that I in there doesn't fit into your sentence. You could change it to like the researcher found that, and when you make that change, you put it within the brackets there, and so that may fit into your sentence better. All right, so the assignments that you need to be working on, you should be finished with your peer review today. If you're watching this after Thursday, then you should have already finished with it. If you haven't already finished with it, then you're too late. So make sure that you finish that up. That's by Thursday. Finish commenting on at least 2 other students' papers, and you're using that same information that you're using to comment on other people's papers to revise your own paper as well. So the final draft of your literature review is going to be due Friday. So if you want to turn it in by noon, you could get 3 points extra credit. Make sure you do your weekly quiz. And also contact me. You can text or email to sign up for a time to meet for an individual conference for next week. Again, only 15 minutes. We can do it via WebEx or we can do it in my office. Whichever works best for you, but you've got to sign up for a time because remember, it's going to be your attendance and it's going to be part of your writing process. Great. So, as always, if you have any questions, please contact me.